So how many of these baggies are we supposed to be making?
Many as we can.
Welcome to this latest edition of the Real Deal Podcast. I'm your host, Real Deal. Playing episode 898. We're getting close to 900. We'll be at 900 probably later this week as we continue to look at the epic hit series Snowfall seasons 1 through 3. We are now halfway through the first season. We're on episode 6, a long time coming. In this episode, to do a quick recap for this episode, Franklin and Gustavo seek help from their families. Freddie Mac gets a second chance. Gustavo and Lucia get closer. So that was basically a quick recap on this episode, on this week's episode. Well, not this week's episode. It's not this week's. Oh boy. On this particular episode. Themes for this episode: rule of 3. I will flush that out over the course of the podcast. Franklin, just ignoring jewels, ignoring nuggets in terms of staying out of the drug game. He ignores those. We'll talk about that. We will talk about that over the course of the podcast. The AV Club would not like this episode either. This is probably like the third or fourth straight week, at least. Maybe episodes 4, 5, 6. Yeah, this is the third straight week that the AV Club has not cared for these episodes. They're getting at it now. They did give it a B-, which is not horrible. Like if it was like a C or a D, of course, a C-, D, or a D, but B- is not terrible. They said, the show continues to lose momentum going towards as they move past the halfway point. Basically, they're not happy. They were not happy with some of the similar things that they've been complaining about in terms of Franklin and in terms of the characters not being held accountable for their actions. They hated the Teddy Mac Alejandro storyline. They despise that. Don't feel like that. They didn't feel like there was enough information given to it. I gotta be fair with. I gotta be fair in terms of the writers. That's a lot to go into with the Iran Contra, the Ronald Reagan, all that stuff. That's a show in itself. So I will give someone have to give the writers a pass from that standpoint, because that is, like I said, that is a show. That's documentaries. Those are books that I'm sure that have been written in terms of what was going on in the 80s with the crack epidemic, with crack and cocaine being flown into the United States and provided by the United States government towards and basically into black communities and all over Los Angeles, all over this country. So they could not go all the way in on that point of that part of the story. They just couldn't like that. There's that's almost too much story to tell. So we'll give it a B-. We'll see what they say next week. We're gonna deep dive the character Knees. So the character Knees was brilliantly played by Bokeem Woodbine. We've seen Bokeem Woodbine, has been around forever. Talk about Jason's Lyric and Strapped and some of the movies. Remember that HBO movie Strapped that he's in. So he's been around for a long, long time. He owned this particular role. Like he had 2 scenes, and in those 2 scenes, now he's starring opposite Franklin and Jerome, 2 signature characters on this show. Especially starring opposite, going toe to toe with those 2, especially Franklin. And to me, like immediately, as soon as he starts talking, we'll flush out more over the course of the podcast in terms of what the conversation that he had with Franklin. But as soon as he starts out talking, he immediately had total command of the scene. News is a cat, of course, is a friend of Jerome's. Jerome tries to enlist him to help Franklin to convince Franklin not to go deep into the drug game. Remember, Jerome at this point, Jerome wants Franklin just to keep it simple. Sell the dime bags, sell the stuff around, sell it, just be safe. Jerome does not want Franklin to deal with any cocaine. He tries to enlist Nees with the help to talk Franklin out of it. Of course, we know that Nees is not successful at that, but what he does give Franklin are some jewels and some things that will like carry him through some things that will resonate over the course of this entire series in terms of what he said to Franklin. Nees had his own, remember, Nees had his own struggles, his own dealings in the drug game, lost half a nut through a bullet that got shot when he got shot off a failed drug deal. And again, he's basically trying to convince Franklin, hey man, this is not the move. This is not the move. There's there are 3 jewels. Well, I might as well go over it right now. 3 jewels in this life, he says, is what your mother tells you, what the streets show you, and what the future holds for you. 2 of them he says 2 of them you have no control over. So think about that in regards to Franklin saying his mom, the streets, and his future. All 3 of those resonated throughout the entire series when you think about it. Not just this season, the entire series. So again, this character was, again, brilliantly played by Bokeem Woodbine. And Bokeem Woodbine, I don't think he's underrated. He's somewhat underrated. I think he might be underappreciated for the type of actor he is. He's not somebody who will just pop in and play in any type of movie. You don't see him a lot, but when he gets some good material like Fargo a couple years back, where he destroyed that role, and probably should have won an Emmy, a Golden Globe for his portrayal of the Kansas City gangster. I forgot what the name of the gangster he played, but he absolutely killed that role, and again has been around for a long time and just owns both the scenes that he was in with Franklin, as he's trying to steer Franklin out of the drug game or going too deep into the drug game. Best scenes: Gustavo, Lucia, and Hernan. So Gustavo introduces, he finds his estranged brother Hernan. Clearly, there's been something that has happened in the past that they did not discuss, and we'll find out soon enough, that has gotten, that has kept them apart. Hernan is in a wheelchair. Hernan has, gang connections. Gustavo tries to enlist the help of Hernan, and Hernan initially threatens Gustavo and Lucia as they try to find a coke connect or someone to move the drugs, and in terms of territory and things of that nature. Initially, again, Hernan blows off Gustavo, and Lucille threatens to hurt him, if not kill him, if they don't leave him alone. But Gustavo talks sense into Hernan. Hernan, of course, is in a wheelchair. He clearly is struggling financially, not making enough money, and Gustavo is able to talk him into having him beat Stomper and some of the other who is the main drug man around that area. So he's able to talk him into it. Says he will take care of him. If he does this, we'll take care of Hernan. Hernan's, Hernan, there's clearly something that happened. Like you got the sense that Gustavo was probably the reason why Hernan ended up in that wheelchair, or maybe like you got that sense, or something happened in the past that has him pissed off at Gustavo. He warns Lucille if things get rough, that Gustavo will run away and disappear. So he gives Lucille that warning. But again, Gustavo was able to talk him into setting up the meeting with Stomper. Jerome and Franklin. So Franklin comes over, gives Jerome the money for the gun. As we see, Jerome is baking cookies. Jerome, this is the second time in the episode that someone tries to talk Franklin either out of the drug business or down, or tries to tell him to kind of scale it back a bit. Earlier in the episode, you had Claudia only taking 4 keys, only taking two keys instead of 4. And she says, "Hey, I'm not that deep in the drug game. I'm not a drug dealer per se. I'm an entertainer. You didn't learn your lesson from Lenny and Ray Ray." And Franklin takes the other 2 keys as he he and Leon and Kevin left Claudia's club, as she had no respect for them. But Jerome's basically telling Franklin, "Look, you this cocaine is gonna mess you up in terms of trying to move it. It's too high profile of a drug. If you're gonna sell it, you're gonna have to find another place to sell it. You have to find somewhere else to sell it." Now, initially, he says, the best bet is to sell. If you're going to sell anything, sell it in the neighborhood. Anywhere else you go sell, you risk exposure with the cops, with the cops or anybody else who's looking to hurt you. So so again, Jerome ideally would want Franklin to sell his dime bags in the neighborhood. That's it. But Franklin understands that has limitations in terms of the type of money that they can make or the type of money that they're going to make. So Louis comes in and Louis comes in and says, "Hey, why don't you take him to Knees?" Of course, we talked about Knees and what Knees and who Knees was. So Jerome, initially, the thing about this scene, and it wasn't a confusing scene, but I guess Jerome was trying to talk Franklin somewhat down about about the drug game and about the cocaine game, but he didn't do a very good job, because 2 things. He encouraged him to basically said, "Hey, you gotta sell it to your own neighborhood." Okay. And 2, he didn't shoot down Louis when she said introduce him to Knees. So I guess based on what transpired with Knees, I guess that they were trying to, and we saw what happened we explained earlier with the deep dive with Knees, that I guess they thought that Knees could possibly scare him out of the drug deal, out of the drug game, which was not going to happen, which certainly did not happen. We go to Knees and Franklin. So there are 2 parts of this scene. There were 2 scenes. We're gonna do 2 in 1. The first part, Knees is with Franklin and Jerome, and Knees tells him the story. They tell him the story about how he lost a nut, half his ball sack in a drug deal that failed. He tries to tell Franklin about how the neighborhood was during that time. Then Franklin shows it with the FBI. Then Franklin shows him how educated he is in terms of regards to understanding the Black Panthers, because of course his dad, Alton, was a Black Panther. So this time, Knees is trying to steer Franklin clear of it, of the drug game. And initially, he's talking to Franklin. Franklin is still showing interest, regardless of what Knees is saying. Franklin is still showing interest in it. So they leave. Franklin comes back by himself. Now at this point, it's just Franklin and Knees. Franklin knows that Knees has connections or has an address in regards to some Mexicans who have territory, or some Mexican connections. And again, before he gives him the address, he again tries to talk him out of it with those 3 jewels in life. Needs tries to say, "Hey, you just don't know good. Basically, you don't know good advice when it's shown to you. Those jewels are free, but this address is going to cost you $1,000." And Franklin acquiesces and pays him $1,000 for the address for the connection. And again, this is Jerome, Dees, and Claudia. So Franklin, at every turn up until this point in the episode, has basically been talked down or seemingly talked away from the drug game. But he proceeds regardless. He proceeds and continues to pursue it. We go to Franklin also and Ephraim. So Franklin is in the neighborhood. No gun. He just has his mom. He ends up borrowing his mom's car. He goes in the neighborhood. Ephraim is one of the local guys who obviously is connected and somehow is connected. He's in their neighborhood, and Franklin asks him, basically Franklin, who clearly like this is a Mexican neighborhood, so Franklin sticks out as like a sore thumb. He's never been there before, so he's a stranger. And we see that you see that Franklin, he talks to Franklin, asks him, "Where are you from? Why are you here?" Initially, it seems like he's going to let Franklin go. Then he busts his window. They take Franklin captive, beat him up, and we're ready to kill him until they run into Oso and Lucille. Oso intervenes, says he's doing business with Stopper. Stopper, of course, seemingly runs that neighborhood, tells Ephraim, basically gives Ephraim a head nod to back off, and also, in essence, saved Franklin's life. Franklin, of course, gives Oso his name, and Franklin immediately makes a connection that was able to put together that Oso is here. Oso and Lucille must be here doing business, and they might have been headed towards the same connection. So he introduces himself officially. They briefly met earlier, remember, in the first episode at the wrestling match, but he officially introduces himself to Franklin. Lucille remembers him from the wrestling match, but he introduces himself to Oso, officially gives him his name, and basically says, if you need something, let me know. He tries to tell Franklin, "Hey, get the fuck out of here, before they kill you," and they actually were going to kill you. So that is, again, we'll see what transpires with Franklin also and Lucille. We certainly we're not done with those three in regards to what's going to be happening with them. We go to Teddy and Alejandro. So Teddy and Alejandro meet up. This is towards the last part of the episode. They talk about the deal. Teddy, of course, they just come from Nicaragua. Not Nicaragua, but they're coming off that plane crash, if you remember. Teddy trying to get back with his family. His wife gives him a second chance. And he's with Alejandro. And Alejandro sees this young lady who is stapling pictures. He recognizes the picture of a missing girl. He recognizes the picture as one of the girls that he killed back at the place in episode 1, if you remember that, back at the mansion, before he killed her. And of course, Logan, the guy that was the point person before Teddy, OD'd. And Alejandro finally comes clean to Teddy, something that Teddy had probably suspected the entire time, that he killed the girl, that he killed that girl that was missing. Teddy, of course, is besides himself, because that's going to put more heat on himself as well as Alejandro. So that is basically how the episode wrapped up, with finally Alejandro coming clean to Teddy about killing the young lady at the house in episode 1. MVP is Oso makes a connection. He gets Lucille to connect with Stomper. He saves Franklin's life, and he's getting closer to Lucia as far as romantically. They haven't done anything yet up to this point, but you see them getting closer over the course of this episode. No Pedro in this episode. No Villanueva family outside of Lucia. No Avi again for the second straight episode. So you just made this squarely was Franklin, Oso, Lucille, and also Teddy Mack. Also saved Franklin's life. Now I think up to this point, I don't think Oso was thinking that he was saving his life to do business with him. I think he just saved his life just as a goodwill favor. Franklin was the one thinking about business in that particular scene, but also definitely is the MVP as he got his brother to be a connection to a guy's brother to introduce him to a connection that they desperately needed if they were going to move the drugs and make money again to gain more power in the Villanueva family. That's going to wrap it up for this latest edition of the Real Deal Podcast. I will see you next time as we look at episode 7, season 1 of Snowfall.